There's a quiet frustration that creeps in when faith doesn't feel like it's doing anything. You pray, you keep going, you try to stay aligned, and still, nothing dramatic happens. No clear sign, no emotional rush, just silence. And if we're honest, that silence can feel like failure. Here's the uncomfortable idea. What if the faith that makes the least noise is actually the one doing the deepest work? Not the kind that impresses people, not the kind that looks strong from the outside, but the kind that keeps shaping you when no one's watching, including you. The Bible presents faith in ways that don't always match our expectations. Sometimes it grows in waiting, sometimes in fatigue, sometimes in doing the right thing without any payoff. And that raises a question most of us don't slow down enough to ask. What if you've been overlooking the very faith that's changing everything? The kind of faith no one applauds. I'll be honest, this isn't easy to say out loud. There's a kind of faith that doesn't raise hands, doesn't post verses, doesn't announce itself at all. It lives quietly, almost hidden, in places no one sees. Scripture presents this kind of faith more often than we notice, but it rarely gets attention because there's no public miracle, no dramatic turnaround, no moment that makes people say, wow. And maybe that's why it makes us uncomfortable. Silence can feel like something's missing, or worse, like God stopped speaking. If you pay attention to the Psalms, many of them were written in moments of pressure, exile, or fear. Historically, these weren't peaceful seasons. They were times when stability was gone and certainty was thin. The text suggests prayers whispered through exhaustion, sometimes sounding more like complaints than praise. How long? The psalmist asks. And often, there's no answer right away. Just space, just breath, just staying there. It's not polished faith, it's honest faith. The Bible returns again and again to the image of the desert. In its ancient context, the desert wasn't symbolic or poetic. It was dangerous. Heat, thirst, silence. Some scholars understand the desert less as a place of revelation and more as a place of internal recalibration. You don't go there to feel inspired. You go there to survive. And faith in that space becomes very practical. One step, one decision, one day, no audience, no applause. And if we bring this closer to everyday life, carefully without forcing it, this quiet faith shows up in ordinary choices, choosing not to answer harsh words, getting up tired, making bad coffee, and still acting with integrity, showing up when no one is watching. That doesn't look spiritual on the outside, but maybe it's not shallow faith, maybe it's settled faith, or maybe it's something else entirely. I'm still thinking that through. I'll admit something. I've caught myself believing that if I don't feel something, then my connection with God must be fading. But one possible reading of Scripture points in another direction. Sometimes silence isn't absence, it's depth. It doesn't excite you, it doesn't give you chills, but it holds you steady, and that raises an uncomfortable question, one we don't rush to answer. When God doesn't interrupt the noise. I need to say this carefully because it's easy to misunderstand. Many people expect faith to sound loud, like a clear voice cutting through the chaos, stopping everything, giving direct answers. But Scripture often shows something else. The Bible presents moments where God doesn't interrupt the noise at all. Life keeps moving, problems stay unresolved, and the person of faith is left wondering if they missed something or if nothing was said on purpose. There's a striking scene involving the prophet Elijah, set in a tense historical moment when prophets were hunted and fear shaped daily life. Elijah expects God to show up with force, wind, earthquake, fire, all the dramatic stuff. But the text suggests that God isn't in any of it. Then comes a gentle whisper, or as some translations hint, a thin silence. Not an announcement, not instructions shouted from the sky, just quiet presence. And Elijah notices, not because it's loud, but because everything else stops. That detail matters. In the ancient world, divine encounters were often associated with spectacle. Power was noisy, authority was obvious. So this moment breaks expectation. A possible reading is that God isn't competing with chaos. He waits until the chaos burns itself out, which is unsettling if we're honest, because it suggests that sometimes the noise in our lives isn't removed, it's endured. Think about how this plays out in ordinary routines. You pray, but nothing changes immediately. Work stays demanding. Relationships remain complicated. Your mind keeps racing at night. No interruption, no clear signal. And yet, something subtle shifts. You respond a little differently. You pause instead of reacting. You notice small convictions forming quietly, not dramatically. That's not cinematic faith, but it's realistic. Here's where I'll admit a limitation. I've often assumed that clarity comes fast if I'm doing things right. But Scripture doesn't always support that assumption. The text suggests that discernment grows slowly, especially in silence. And maybe that's intentional. A loud answer can be followed blindly. A quiet one requires attention, patience, maturity, or at least willingness to stay present. So here's the uncomfortable tension we're left with. Not a conclusion, just a thought. If God doesn't interrupt the noise right away, could it be that faith isn't about hearing more, but about listening better? Faith that forms while nothing changes. I'm going to be very honest here. This is the part most people quietly avoid. We like faith that fixes things. We struggle with faith that forms us while everything stays the same. Scripture doesn't hide this tension. In fact, it leans into it. There are long stretches in the biblical narrative where nothing visibly improves, yet something internal is clearly being shaped. And that kind of formation is slow, almost inconveniently slow. Take the long years of Israel's wandering. Historically and culturally, this wasn't just travel. It was instability as a lifestyle. No permanent home, no clear timeline. The text suggests repetition. Walking, stopping, waiting, complaining, hoping, repeating. There's no dramatic progress montage. Just routine survival. Some interpretations point out that the journey could have been shorter geographically, but spiritually, something else was happening. Not movement forward, formation inward. What's striking is how human the responses are. People grumble, they doubt. They remember the past selectively. There are moments where it sounds like an argument more than a prayer, and God doesn't shut that down immediately. The narrative allows space for frustration to exist alongside faith. That alone challenges the idea that mature faith is always calm and confident. Sometimes it's tired, but still showing up. Now, bring this gently into everyday life. There are seasons where prayers don't change circumstances, but they change posture. You still wake up with the same responsibilities, the same job, the same unresolved tension, but your inner reactions start shifting almost without permission. You pause more, you react less, you notice your thoughts before they run away with you. That's not exciting, but it's stabilizing, and stability matters more than we admit. Here's where I've caught myself. I tend to measure growth by visible outcomes, results, open doors, clear answers. But Scripture often measures growth by endurance, the ability to stay present without clarity, to remain grounded without reassurance. A possible reading is that faith isn't always preparing you for a new situation. Sometimes it's preparing you to remain faithful in the current one. So let me leave this unresolved on purpose. If nothing around you changes for a while, no breakthrough, no dramatic shift, could it be that something essential is still being built quietly underneath? The strength that shows up after you're tired. I'm going to start this one abruptly because that's how it usually hits. Real faith often shows up after you're exhausted, not before. Scripture doesn't romanticize this, but it doesn't rush past it either. There are moments in the biblical story where strength doesn't appear as energy or motivation, but as the ability to take one more step when enthusiasm is already gone. And that kind of strength feels very different from excitement. Look at figures like Moses later in his life. Culturally and historically, leadership in the ancient world was tied to vitality and visible authority. Yet Moses spends decades leading while tired, frustrated, and often misunderstood. The text doesn't hide his weariness. He questions, he hesitates, he even asks God to send someone else. A possible reading here isn't that Moses lacked faith, but that faith sometimes operates through limitation, not confidence. There's a quiet honesty in how Scripture portrays endurance. No speeches, no swelling music, just responsibility carried again and again. The people complain, the pressure mounts, and Moses keeps returning to the tent, not to recharge emotionally, but to stay aligned. That detail matters. Faith in this sense isn't about feeling strong. It's about refusing to walk away when weakness would justify it. This lands uncomfortably close to real life. There are seasons where you're not inspired, not hopeful, not even sure you're doing the right thing, yet you keep showing up. You answer emails with decency. You treat people fairly when you're drained. You don't quit on commitments just because the joy left the room. That's not glamorous faith. But it's dependable, and dependability shapes character quietly. Here's something I've had to admit. I often confuse tiredness with failure, but Scripture doesn't. A possible interpretation is that fatigue isn't evidence of distance from God. Sometimes it's evidence of long obedience, of staying in the process longer than comfort would suggest. And that reframes everything, not as punishment, but as participation. So here's the tension I want to leave hanging. If faith doesn't always remove exhaustion, but teaches us how to carry it with integrity, what kind of strength are we actually praying for? When faith stops needing an audience. I'll say this plainly, even if it feels uncomfortable. At some point, faith matures to a place where it no longer needs to be seen. Early on, visibility feels important. Shared prayers, spoken convictions, clear positions. And that's not wrong, it's human. But Scripture slowly introduces another layer, one where faith keeps going, even when no one is watching, affirming or agreeing. And that shift changes everything. Jesus hints at this in teachings given within a very specific cultural setting where public displays of devotion were common and often respected. Fasting, prayer, generosity, all of it could earn social standing. But the text suggests a different posture. Quiet obedience, private prayer, intentional restraint. Not as a rule for all situations, but as a corrective to performative spirituality. Faith here isn't less expressive, it's less dependent. There's something deeply unsettling about that, because an audience gives feedback, silence doesn't. When no one notices your discipline, your patience, your restraint, motivation has to come from somewhere else. And Scripture seems to suggest that this is where faith becomes internalized, not borrowed from community energy, but anchored in conviction. Not louder, deeper. This plays out in practical ways we rarely label as spiritual, choosing honesty when cutting corners would go unnoticed, showing kindness without being thanked, letting go of the need to explain yourself all the time. None of that looks like strong faith from the outside, but internally it builds a steadiness that doesn't collapse under pressure or praise. And that steadiness matters more than momentum. Here's where I've caught myself hesitating. I like encouragement. I like affirmation, and there's nothing wrong with that. But Scripture gently asks whether faith collapses when validation disappears. A possible reading is that faith becomes resilient when it's no longer fueled by reaction, positive or negative, when it keeps choosing the good, even in quiet. So let's leave this unresolved the way Scripture often does. If no one ever noticed your faith again, no feedback, no recognition, would it still shape your choices the same way? The moment faith becomes quietly unshakable. I'm going to slow this one down because this shift is easy to miss. There's a moment, not dramatic, not announced, when faith stops reacting and starts settling. Nothing explodes, nothing resolves cleanly, but something inside becomes harder to knock over. Scripture doesn't frame this as victory, it frames it as grounding. And grounding rarely feels exciting when it's happening. There's a pattern across biblical narratives where trust deepens after disappointment. Think of figures who prayed boldly and still waited, hoped sincerely and still endured loss. Historically, many of these stories were preserved in communities that knew instability well. Faith wasn't a safety net. It was a way to stay upright when safety wasn't guaranteed. The text suggests that belief didn't remove uncertainty, it coexisted with it. What changes is not the situation, but the response. Early faith asks, will this work out? Mature faith asks, how do I live well even if it doesn't? That's a hard transition. It strips away bargaining. It removes the illusion of control. And yet, it brings a strange calm. Not because answers arrive, but because expectations are recentered. Not on outcomes, on faithfulness. This shows up in everyday decisions more than we admit. You stop replaying conversations late at night. You make choices aligned with your values, even when the results are unclear. You rest without guilt. You act without needing guarantees. That's not passive. It's deeply intentional. And it takes more courage than dramatic belief ever did. Here's something I had to learn the slow way. Stability isn't the absence of doubt. It's the refusal to let doubt dictate every move. Scripture seems comfortable with unanswered questions living alongside obedience. A possible reading is that faith becomes unshakable, not when everything makes sense, but when meaning no longer depends on certainty. So let this question linger without rushing it. If your faith didn't promise clarity, success, or relief, only presence and direction, would that still be enough to keep walking? When faith changes, how you see everything. This is where things quietly shift, almost without warning. Faith stops being something you do and starts becoming something you see through. Scripture doesn't announce this moment. There's no marker in the text saying, "Here, transformation complete." Instead, it shows up in perception. The same world, the same people, the same problems, but interpreted differently. And that difference changes how you move through it all. There's a subtle pattern in the Gospels where Jesus doesn't always change situations immediately, but he reframes them. A seed becomes a lesson. A coin becomes a question. A delay becomes meaningful. In the first century context, this way of teaching wasn't about giving answers. It was about reshaping imagination. The text suggests that faith wasn't just belief in God's power, but trust in God's perspective. Seeing what others rushed past. That kind of vision takes time. It grows through repetition, disappointment, silence, endurance, all the things we've been circling around. And suddenly, moments that once felt meaningless start carrying weight. Waiting becomes formative. Ordinary conversations become revealing. Even frustration becomes informative, not because it feels good, but because it tells the truth about what still needs shaping. In practical terms, this changes small things. You listen more carefully instead of preparing your response. You notice patterns in your reactions. You pause before assuming motives. Faith, here, becomes less about certainty and more about attentiveness, less about control and more about wisdom. It doesn't make life easier, but it makes it clearer. I'll admit this part still catches me off guard. I expect faith to give direction, but sometimes it gives discernment instead. Not go left or right, but pay attention here. Scripture seems to suggest that maturity looks less like confidence and more like awareness. And awareness is demanding. It requires presence. It asks you to stay awake to what's actually happening. So here's the quiet question to sit with, not to answer quickly. If faith isn't changing your circumstances right now, but it is changing how you interpret them, what might you be starting to see that you couldn't see before? The faith that holds when everything else lets go. I need to approach this gently, because this is where faith becomes less about growth and more about weight. There comes a point where faith isn't adding anything new, it's holding what remains. Scripture doesn't rush through these moments, it lingers. It shows people standing with nothing impressive in their hands except endurance. And endurance, honestly, doesn't photograph well, but it lasts. There's a recurring biblical tension where hope narrows instead of expands. Job is a clear example, rooted in ancient wisdom literature, not as a universal formula, but as a narrative exploration of suffering. The text doesn't give easy explanations. Friends talk too much, answers feel thin, and Job's faith isn't loud or polished, it's stripped down. He questions God directly, he protests, yet he stays in the conversation. That detail matters. Faith here is not agreement, it's refusal to disengage. What's unsettling is that Scripture allows faith to look messy at this stage. No clean resolution, no quick moral, just presence under pressure. A possible reading is that faith becomes most honest when it stops pretending to be strong. When all the extra layers fall away, certainty, optimism, language, what's left is raw trust. Or maybe just stubborn hope. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. This kind of faith shows up in life when plans fall apart and you don't rush to replace them. When answers don't come and you stop demanding them. You still act responsibly, you still care, but you stop forcing meaning too quickly. That restraint is not passive, it's disciplined. It's choosing not to lie to yourself just to feel better. Here's where I've had to sit uncomfortably. I like faith that builds. I struggle with faith that holds, but Scripture seems to honor both. One grows you outward, the other roots you inward, and the second often comes after the first has done all it can. Not as failure, but as depth. So let this question stay unanswered for now. If everything you relied on before went quiet, explanations, reassurance, momentum, what part of your faith would still remain standing? When faith quietly reshapes your inner world. This is the part no one warns you about. Faith doesn't just change what you believe, it slowly rearranges your inner furniture. The things that once dominated your thoughts lose some power. The things you ignored start asking for attention. Scripture doesn't describe this shift with fireworks. It happens quietly over time, almost like you wake up one day and realize your reactions aren't what they used to be. There's a pattern in the letters of the New Testament, written to early Christian communities living under pressure, misunderstanding, and social instability. These weren't ideal conditions for spiritual growth. Yet the text suggests an inner transformation taking place anyway. Patience, self-control, a steadiness that didn't depend on comfort. Not because life improved, but because perspective did. Faith didn't remove stress. It reorganized priorities. What changes most is the inner dialogue. Fear doesn't disappear, but it stops running the whole conversation. Anger still shows up, but it doesn't stay as long. You begin to notice yourself thinking, I don't need to react to this the way I used to. That awareness is subtle, but it's powerful. It signals that faith has moved from theory into instinct. This affects daily life more than dramatic moments ever could. You rest without constantly justifying yourself. You let some things go without winning the argument. You choose peace over being right, not because you're weak, but because you're grounded. That kind of maturity isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself, but it makes life livable in ways constant intensity never could. I'll be transparent. This stage feels almost anticlimactic. You expect faith to feel bigger. Instead, it feels calmer, and Scripture seems comfortable with that. A possible reading is that faith's goal isn't constant elevation, but deep stability. Not emotional highs, but emotional honesty. And honesty takes courage. So let this question sit with you. If faith is quietly reshaping how you think, respond, and rest, even without dramatic moments, would you recognize that as real growth? The faith that outlives the moment. I want to approach this one without rushing, because this is where faith stretches beyond emotion and even beyond seasons. There's a kind of faith that isn't built for a moment of crisis or a phase of growth. It's built to last longer than the situation that formed it. Scripture hints at this quietly, not as achievement, but as legacy. Faith that keeps its shape even when circumstances change. Biblically, this shows up in figures who don't see the outcome of what they trusted for. Historically, many of them lived in transitional periods, between promises and fulfillment, between generations. The text suggests that their faith wasn't validated by results they could point to. It was validated by consistency, by staying aligned even when the story moved past them. That's a hard truth, and Scripture doesn't soften it. There's something sobering about faith that plants trees it won't sit under. It means trusting that obedience matters even if you never see the impact clearly. This kind of faith isn't dramatic, it's steady. It values faithfulness over visibility. And that reframes success entirely, not as completion, but as contribution, not as arrival, but as direction. In everyday life, this changes how you approach time. You stop demanding that every effort pay off immediately. You invest in people without controlling outcomes. You make decisions based on values, not applause. Faith becomes less about personal fulfillment and more about alignment, living in a way that makes sense even beyond your own timeline. Here's where I've had to pause myself. I like closure. I like resolution. But Scripture often leaves stories open-ended on purpose. A possible reading is that faith isn't meant to close every loop. Sometimes it's meant to keep the thread unbroken, even when the ending belongs to someone else. So let this question stay open without forcing an answer. If your faith is shaping choices that may only fully make sense later, or to someone else, would you still consider it worth living by? The quiet faith that actually changes the world. I'll be honest, this is not the ending most people expect. We're used to stories where faith explodes into visible impact, movements, platforms, recognition. But Scripture often closes its narratives differently. It points to a kind of faith that doesn't look world-changing while it's happening. It looks small, local, almost ordinary, and yet over time it reshapes everything around it. There's a pattern across the biblical story where the most enduring change comes through unnoticed obedience. A woman who keeps praying in private. A man who refuses to abandon integrity when compromise would be easier. A community that chooses love in a hostile environment. Historically, many of these stories come from marginalized groups with no political or cultural power. And still, the text suggests their faith altered the course of history, slowly, quietly, without headlines. Jesus himself leans heavily into this imagery. Yeast in dough, a seed in soil, a lamp not meant to blind, but to give steady light. In first-century culture, these metaphors pointed to processes, not performances, change that happens from the inside out. Faith that doesn't dominate, it permeates. It doesn't demand attention. It earns trust over time. This reframes what impact actually looks like. Faith changes the way you treat people who can't repay you. It shapes how you handle power, money, words, time. It influences decisions no one will ever trace back to belief. And that's the point. The transformation is real precisely because it isn't trying to prove itself. I've had to rethink this myself. I used to assume that if faith mattered, it would be obvious. But Scripture seems to argue the opposite. A possible reading is that the deepest influence happens beneath the surface, long before results are measurable. Faith doesn't rush to be effective. It commits to being faithful first. So here's the final question I want to leave hanging. Not answered, not wrapped up neatly. If the faith that truly transforms the world is quiet, patient, and mostly unseen, how would that change the way you measure whether your own faith is actually working? If there's one thread running through this entire story, it's this. Faith doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it works slowly, reshaping how you endure, how you choose, how you stay when walking away would be easier. Not louder, not flashier, just truer. And maybe that's why it lasts. The kind of faith that doesn't demand certainty, applause, or immediate results, but still keeps leaning toward what is good, right, and faithful. So here's a simple reflection to sit with. If faith is meant to shape who you're becoming more than what you're achieving, how does that change the way you evaluate your own journey? If this story resonated with you, leave a comment sharing what part stayed with you the most. And if you want to keep exploring this quieter, deeper side of faith, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. The next video picks up right where this tension lingers, and it might challenge one assumption you didn't even realize you were holding.